Perfect. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to this YPG talks. I've always found them very, very nice and useful when I was part of the YPG. So it's nice to be here. Well, I've been asked to talk about a little bit about my career path and how I got to the Inter-American Development Bank. As you said, my background is in environmental engineering and in environmental sciences. I have my master's degree as well. And after I finished my bachelor's back in Colombia, where I'm originally from, I was able to start working in the waste sector a little bit with the university that I was studying at. We did a research on e-waste and EPR policies for the national government, and that's where I started working on the waste sector. Then I went to do my master's degree in Switzerland, and when I returned to Colombia, I started working more on a contract-based type of projects in different areas, not only just waste, but wastewater and air quality. But after that, I was able to go into the national government of Colombia with the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development. And there, I was working for a climate change initiative, but focused on the waste sector. So mitigation actions and identifying policies that would incentivize the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions on the waste sector specifically. So this gave me the opportunity to start learning a lot about the sector, about what the policy framework back in Colombia was, what the barriers we had were, and I was able to work on those barriers with different colleagues from the national government and actually work on those to enhance best practices in terms of incentivizing recycling practices and focusing a lot on the inclusion of the informal sector, which is a big part of the waste sector in developing countries. So that's where I started working and learning about the informal sector. And through that work at the national government, I was able to start interacting also with cooperation agencies, international development banks and other supporters of the development internationally and other governments, and started looking at opportunities also to work at the international level, and that's where I found this opportunity at the IDB, which is the bank that focuses their work on Latin America and the Caribbean. So they were looking for a consultant that had experience on the informal sector to work in a grant-based project initially, which was the Regional Initiative for Inclusive Recycling, which was a partnership from different stakeholders, the private sector, the bank, the NGOs that were providing a fund to finance activities for supporting the grassroots recycling cooperatives and associations throughout the region. So my background was, and my professional experience was very aligned with what they were looking for. So I was selected for that position at the bank. And my work initially, as I said, was based on smaller pilot projects, grant finance. We did a lot of research on knowledge products as well, developing toolkits for decision makers of the region to be able to develop policy that was evidence-based. We also collected a lot of data that was not previously available for the region in terms of the informal sector and informality in the region. And then I also I had the opportunity within the bank to start working more in the bigger projects, the loan projects that are loans that are provided for the national government directly, and that finance bigger infrastructure investments, such as closure of dump sites, construction of landfills, transfer stations, and other facilities for recycling activities and anaerobic digesters, those kinds of things where you would improve the waste management practices in the countries that we were working on. So I was able to start working also on that part of the business of the bank. I was able to work through the bigger projects of the loans in Peru, in Mexico, in Belize, and through the grant projects on the regional initiative for inclusive recycling in many other countries of the region, and most of them where we had both pilot projects, much smaller projects supporting the grassroots recyclers with smaller infrastructure facilities or equipment, and also training and capacity building for them and for the local city governments as well. So this was more of the focus of the grant-based projects, and then the loan part of the business of the bank was bigger infrastructure projects, which I would support through the lens of the informal recyclers and how to approach their inclusion in the project when we close the dump site, and what to do with this population that was previously there practicing waste picking, how to incorporate them into more formal waste management alternatives within the project. The bank developed a whole methodology on how to do that specifically for the informal recycling sector, because the bank has a broader policy on what to do in case you're impacting the livelihood of people through the development of projects in other sectors. But we developed a specific methodology of developing inclusion plans for the informal sector as well. So that was a main focus of the work, which we developed through the grant-based initiative, and then we mainstreamed into the loans of the bank. I started implementing those types of plans in the development of loans at the bank. That was very interesting work, where it depends a lot on how the country is managing the informal sector and how to approach it. Each country is going to be very, very different. So that was a very nice experience, and just to learn how different all the countries were, coming just from the Colombian government, knowing very well like just the policy framework of my country, and then coming to learn all the different aspects of what other countries were doing, how they were compared to my country, and how the different challenges in the region, how they vary a lot from country to country and from city to city. So that was a great learning experience at the bank, like broadening my view on the waste sector and on the informal sector as well. Yeah, I supported activities such as communications as well, to bring more partners to the initiative, to support the work throughout the region on inclusion of recyclers, of changing the image that people have of informal recycling, of showing how that's supporting the waste management system in an enormous way, but that's not being recognized by governments, and how that can be formalized, how can that be professionalized and incorporated into as adequate waste management practices, also supporting the livelihoods of these communities that have done that work for decades without any recognition. So yeah, I was at the bank for 4 years as a consultant, as I said at the beginning. The bank has like these restrictions on how long you can stay at the bank as a consultant. So that's the maximum time that was allowed. So that's why I left the bank. And that was like maybe something that's like very important just as young professionals to learn. Maybe it's easier to get into a development bank, or at least at the IDB, through a consultant position. There's a lot of those opening up all the time, but those don't guarantee like a very stable position at the bank. Only the staff positions would be more of a long-term opportunity at those institutions. And at least at the IDB, those don't open very often. So it's not as easy to be able to work at the bank directly entering as a staff member. So that's something that I wasn't able to do. but the consultant experience was very interesting. And you're working side by side with the staff, so it's almost as performing the work of the staff, but without the staff position, like name on your resume. And yeah, after that, I've just been working as an independent consultant, supporting work in other developing countries in terms of policy mostly, supporting works in think tanks as well. And that's been more like a year or so that I've been doing this independent consultancy work. And yeah, I think that's kind of a summary of how my career path has developed. Please let me know if you have any questions about it. I'll be glad to answer anything that you would like to know or for me to explain a little bit further.
Thank you, Diana. It was like really interesting knowing your career path and everything. And for the questions, I think we would be taking in the end of the session, like after Silpa's talk. So that'll be like manage the time, yeah. Although I have a few questions, but let's take it to the next part. So next is to you, Silpa. If you could like briefly introduce yourself and your career path as well. Silpa, can you hear us?
There should, yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah, we can see you. Yeah.
We can see you, but we can't hear you. I like. Should I show the presentation?
Okay, so Silpa is saying that you need to unmute her, Nina.
Okay.
Do that. Yeah.
It was not me. Wait. Let me check it out. Does it work? And now we can't hear you.
Now let's see.
I actually I do not see that. Silpa, I do not see that you are muted. It shows me that your audio is not connected. No, we can't hear you. No. Okay, can you try to log in again? Let us try like this. In the meantime, I have a question to Diana. So,
sure.
Diana, I have a question, like how your experience in the Colombian government did help you during your career in the IDB?
Well, as I said, I started working on the informal sector and learning about how that reality was working on the field in Colombia, and that was like the main part that helped me to get the position at the bank. But for sure, my experience at the national government helped me a little to understand how the banks work, because we were supported by different development banks as a national government. We received support from them as grants and loans. So I would say I already knew how that business of the banks worked a little bit, at least from the beneficiary side of the work of the banks. But I think my experience in policy that I gained through the national government back in Colombia was also very useful for my work at the bank. Colombia at that time and currently as well was very advanced compared to other countries in the region in terms of policy, mostly in the financial sustainability of the waste management services. Colombia has a very complex methodology on how to calculate the costs of each of the services that are provided through waste management, so from collection, sweeping, transportation, final disposal, and in between recycling, composting, everything else. And by the time I started, recycling and composting were not included in that methodology of fees. So my work included putting in or setting incentives in the national policy in order to incentivize recycling, mostly through the fee, so that it was paid as if operators wanted to provide that service, it started to be a service that was paid under the fee of waste management. So all that work that I did in a policy-based focus helped me a lot with the work that I developed afterwards at the bank, because I had a little background on how the national government in Colombia had already established those types of incentives and how those could be done in other parts of the region, which didn't have at all a financial or a financial sustainability or a cost recovery scheme in most of the cases existent in other countries. So I think that helped me a lot. And what I gained from the bank was more the experience on project management, on implementation of specific projects. That was something that I didn't have the experience on before from the national government. So that's probably what I brought with me to the bank with my experience at the national government. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Diana, for your answer. Silpa, can we try again with you? So let's see if we can hear you. Yeah, perfect. We can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so then, so I'll just talk really quickly about my background, and then show you some slides about the World Bank more broadly, because I just in case people are interested in understanding the bank a bit more. We all call our own institutions the bank. So, because I know someone that works at Bank of America and they call it the bank, and then at the central bank in the U.S. and it's the bank, right? So my background is in mechanical engineering for my bachelor's, and then I did a master's in economics, and then a master's in policy administration. And then that third degree was focused on, it was a mix of economics, policy, and management, but all for the international development context. And throughout my degrees, I focused on kind of international development applications and more on the environmental side. And so basically, I would say I had a couple of jobs before the World Bank. One was working as an economist, modeling domestic healthcare policy, which is not as related to our talk. And then, but I really missed working on international development and kind of being in that space. And so I worked with a grassroots environmental NGO in India focusing on water and waste management. And that was when I became really passionate about waste management. And that was when I helped map out the value chain of the system for the city and do a waste characterization study and try to help them understand their waste situation a bit more. And basically, the other waste-related things before the bank were, I briefly was with a startup in India, a waste startup in India that was trying to basically create waste picker cooperatives and add more value kind of post-collection of materials in a number of ways. And then And then other than that, I was in New York working with an organic waste technology company, like helping them do business development. And I think I was the only person with like a waste background actually there. And I would say both of those were really great experiences to understand, like, you know, from digging through the garbage and understanding kind of more how a city would, like where the gaps are in a small city, and you know how a city would approach it, to then thinking about, well, what are the advanced technologies to solve or to address, you know, food waste. And so basically, so I finished my grad schooling, and then had these experiences by the time I joined the bank. And I joined the bank. I actually just came to attend some waste events. I was in New York at the time. A friend of mine knew I was passionate about waste management and international development. And the organic waste technology company was focused on the U.S., but then looking to expand into markets abroad. So I was helping them think about other countries. But I really missed development. And so I just came down to like go to some events and learn about what the bank was doing in waste. And then in that process, I asked a couple of people to grab coffee to just learn more. Actually not even intending to leave New York, but just wanting to learn more. And then, and like Diana said, there aren't that many people that work in waste management also on the World Bank side. And so it wasn't, so basically they said, look, I mean, there aren't that many people, and so it's pretty rare that they hire staff for it. But then it turned out that they had a full-time position open up because somebody was leaving. So I joined the World Bank as an extended term consultant. And actually I'll open the presentation so then I can also give you kind of a broader sense of different ways you can join the bank and how the bank works. Okay. Wait, are you seeing a Croatia presentation or a World Bank presentation?
Oh, I think we can see your shared screen yet, because all I'm seeing is you at the moment.
Oh, okay, great. Okay,
Oh,
now I
now
see.
now it's there. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so just to zoom back for a second. And so for those of you not familiar with the World Bank, our goals are to end extreme poverty and boost shared prosperity. And so most of what we do tends to focus on the bottom 40% of a country. And we do a mix of like development finance, which is what we're mainly known for, but also we're really good at convening because we're a global institution, and then also generating knowledge and research. And there are 5 different entities of the World Bank Group, 2 that focus on kind of interacting with governments, 2 that work with the private sector, and 1 that focuses on kind of international settlements and is a bit more independent. So when we talk about the World Bank, most of the time we're talking about the 2 arms that are interacting with governments, and that are either giving, you know, grants or zero interest loans to the lowest income countries, loans to low middle income countries, or being hired for technical advisory services by higher income countries. But really when people say World Bank, that's generally what they're referring to. And this slide just gives you a sense of kind of our business in the past year and where we're working around the world. And we work on many different issues like education, energy, health, social protection. I mean, really, you name it, like urban development, disaster risk management, water, social development. Like we work on a whole host of issues. And waste management, I mean, it sits in a couple of different areas within the World Bank. So, I fall under urban development. And so when I work on waste management, it could be it could be on the technology side and helping cities think about what are the appropriate trucks and infrastructure related, from community level infrastructure up to final disposal of a city. Or it could be helping look at institutions, laws, how to change behavior, sustainable financing, the social aspects, the environmental aspects. Like from an urban perspective, we're looking in a very integrated way. So like, who is the right service provider? What are the incentives along the way? Kind of these aspects. Then there's another practice within the World Bank called environment and natural resources. And if a waste management project falls under that practice, it's typically more related to like hazardous waste management, dump site remediation, more kind of brownfield projects. And then sometimes waste management projects might fall under the water practice also, and that might be more related to kind of, a poor waste collection leading to flooding and clogging of drains. So these are the areas where waste sits within the World Bank. And so I would say, so urban, the largest waste management portfolio is under urban development, just given that it's a little bit more comprehensive. And we work at both local levels and national levels. So to give you a sense of different ways you can work at the bank, so for full-time opportunities, there's the Young Professionals Program, but it's, to be frank with you, it's a very small program. I think they take about 40 people from around the world every year, and they get thousands of applicants. And typically, you have to be 32 years old or younger. People already have a grad degree and typically some work experience by then. And really, they want you to come in with a deep expertise in something technical. So it could be economics, like it could be that broad, and then a breadth, kind of your know that you're able to cut across sectors. So let's say economics is your area of expertise, that you're able to work across, health and climate, education, etc. And yeah, so and then they typically recruit, I think you apply in June and then interview in the fall, winter, and then they let you know, I think in February or March, or kind of that time frame. And most of the people that are in the program are closer to 31, 32. And then another way to enter the bank full-time is an extended term consultancy, which is how I entered the bank. So it's a 1 to 2 year full-time contract. You're just not guaranteed anything beyond that contract. And usually it's for like some big project. So for me, it was, I mean, it sounds similar in Diana, actually, where they hired me and I was essentially staff. And I was hired to work on solid waste management and also low carbon planning. So for the solid waste management side, it was a mix of analytical work and operational work. And so on the analytical side, a couple of different publications. Probably the most well-known one is the recent What a Waste 2.0 publication that came out a year ago. And then on the operational side, I was working on projects in Jamaica, Liberia, Sri Lanka, China, a country in the Middle East. And then on the low carbon side, I developed an analytical tool to help cities understand and estimate how much emissions they could reduce across different sectors, including waste, but also transportation, energy, water, etc. So I had a 2-year contract through an extended term consultancy, and then I interviewed for a staff position, and so I've been staff for the past 4.5 years, and I was an extended term consultant the first 2 years. And then, and staff position, you could have a term contract, which could be 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, you know, and a lot of times they'll start you on a short-term contract, and then you work towards either a longer-term contract or open-ended. And then for part-time work, there are short-term consultancies, and there are no year restrictions like IDP, but you can work a maximum of 150 days in a calendar year, and you don't have benefits, and yeah, you don't have benefits the way you would with a full-time position. I would say that, you know, most people that enter the bank enter as a short-term consultant, or definitely enter as a consultant, and then kind of prove yourself, and then you're brought on by the team. But like Diana said, it's very risky. So yeah, so you have to, like, if you're in a very niche field, and you're able to kind of be fungible, still even within that niche field, like so within waste management, if you're a landfill engineer and you only want to look at, you know, engineering documents, then it's likely that what you're interested in might not be the best fit for a full-time position. If we just need like a landfill engineer to review engineering documents for a couple of projects, you know, like that's a very different skill set than if you're able to kind of zoom out more broadly and think at a policy level, but then also be able to dive into technical aspects. So yeah, so I would think about that. There are pros and cons to being a consultant or not being a consultant. And it also, being a consultant allows you to test out different units before you commit. And in a bigger institution, the people you work with make all the difference, I think. So that's also, that can be beneficial. Okay, so I thought I would just talk about 2 projects that I really like to give you a flavor of the types of projects that we work on. So there's a project in Jamaica I've been involved in for 6+ years at this point. And basically we're giving about a $40 million loan to help 18 inner-city communities in Jamaica attack crime and violence. So this is not like a waste management project. This is a project focused on crime and violence, where there's a mix of municipal investments and social development investments, so that we can transform the communities like very holistically. And waste management fits in the like kind of municipal infrastructure front. So to give you a sense, on the municipal infrastructure side, it's a mix of like electricity connections, roads, drainage, waste management, water connections, like very basic. And on the social side, it's like violence prevention, interventions to have safer schools, build skills and jobs, etc. And the waste management piece is critical because, I mean, it has been incredible to see these communities get clean, and to see how much pride people have in their space and their determination to keep their space clean and to be proud of it. And so that's why it's a very small part of the project, but I think something that has helped with the transformation. So we looked at solid waste in kind of 3 ways. One was infrastructure investments at the community level, capacity building for the government, communities, and waste employees. And then third was to focus on behavior change at the community level by using results-based financing. So how do you get people that are used to burning their garbage or throwing their garbage in a canal to now start putting it in one place. And then also separating out their recyclables and ideally organic. So how do you make that big jump? And then also how do you get a waste agency that's very under-resourced to collect from communities that are informal and that don't pay their taxes? You know, so we really wanted to kind of play with changing the behavior on these aspects. So yeah, I think I actually covered this content, so I'm going to keep going. So the results-based financing piece is my favorite. But basically, we hired people through the project to be environmental wardens part-time in the community. So these are people within the community because they're a very high unemployment rate. So people were hired to go around, tell other community members, please put your garbage in the dumpster, in the recycling bin, and then they would organize community cleanups and just generally kind of help with the cleanliness related to the community. And so financial incentives were given to the environmental wardens and community organizations if the communities were clean. And then the second phase has been if they're separating out their recyclables, then they also get a financial incentive. And it's very small, couple $100 like every couple of months. It's very, very small incentive. And then the second thing was because the waste agency is under-resourced and definitely doesn't have budget and also doesn't have enough trucks. So through the project, we gave them a couple of trucks up front and then said, well, if you collect regularly, like twice a week, 3 times a week from these communities, then based on your performance, you can get an additional truck every year. And these incentives have been enough to change behavior, and it's been a couple of years now. And so the idea is that at this point, we're going to phase out. We've already phased out with the wardens, and then the waste agency incentives will also end this year. And so we're hoping that this will result in sustainable behavior. Yeah, so the first 2 photos are from my first trip to Jamaica, where there's a kid dumping waste, and now the canals are pretty clean, yeah. So again, like it's a world of a difference. And then the second project, I'm going to wrap up in a second. So the second project I also like because it's much more macro. So I was working with the national government to develop a national waste management strategy in Azerbaijan, and then build capacity at the national level, and then also focusing on the capital city and really transforming the capital city. So there was a massive, massive dump site where this picture was taken actually, and the dump site was always on fire. There were scavengers there. The river was polluted, and initially the World Bank was supposed to close the dump, and kind of in the process they decided to close the dump, but then build a landfill on top of it and kind of clean up the area around, and really focus on the environmental and social impact. So I'll leave that there, and I'm happy to answer questions about any of our projects. And then these are some recent publications which you all might be familiar with, but I just wanted to let you know. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Silpa. It was really thorough, and yeah, we have now a very clear picture of what the World Bank looks like and how does it work and how to get into. As for the participants, you can just comment your questions into the chat box, whether it's for Silpa or Diana. And yeah, I guess we have a very first question that's from Namrata, and they say thank you, Diana and Silpa. I'm interested in sustainable waste management and waste to energy. My first question is for Silpa. for the extended term and short-term consultancy, do I have to apply specifically for the job opening on the website, or can I send unsolicited application? So that's what you suggest. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I would say that if you see a job opening, of course, apply online. I mean, I was outside the bank, and I know a lot of people outside the bank that get hired through the job openings online. But I would say that it's also worth maybe not like an unsolicited application, but I think it's worth just getting to know people at the bank that work on waste management and letting them know, one, I mean, learning about what projects are happening so that you have a better understanding of how you could fit in, and then sharing your CV with them and just letting them know that, hey, if you think of anything, like, certainly let me know.
So that would be like for the people you already know within the bank, or you just like randomly pop an email asking details about the projects going on and something like that?
You can email people, and like if there's a project that you think is really interesting, you can email the person running it and say, hi, I heard about this project and I thought that XYZ aspects were really interesting. Would you mind would you mind talking to me so I can learn more about this and maybe other work you have in waste management? And then, I mean, I think you can send an email like that, and then you could try to arrange a phone call, or if you're in that person's city, you could try to meet with them and then try to, yeah, just understand what's happening. But I would say I wouldn't send an email asking for something. I would send an email which shows that you've done your research, right? And that there's something specific that you are interested in that person offers, rather than like a blanket email that's very generic. I would just show that you've done a little bit of your research.
Perfect, makes sense. Like not wasting their time either. Yeah, and then I have a couple of questions, or I think we got one more question. Oh yeah, she's just saying thanks. Okay, I have a couple of questions. Even from Diana's profile and from your profile, any of you could answer my question, or both of you. Are there any particular skill set that you would say to have, especially when you're working with formal sector versus working with informal sector, and how does it play out? Like I see both of you like having a lot of experience or maybe contribution with informal sector in particular alongside as well. Maybe Diana also, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a particular skill set. And Diana can respond this or can react to this, but for me, I felt like it was invaluable to be on the ground and to understand the nuances, which you can't from DC. And it's very different when you're when you kind of see the reality, see the constraints, understand why it is that sometimes if you're in the informal sector, you don't want to be organized. And it makes sense, given some of the local realities, and that you want independence and other things, depending on also the country you're in. So I just think field experience is valuable to understand the nuances on the ground. And I don't know if it's necessarily a specific skill, but I do notice that, like, once I joined the World Bank, this is something that's very important to me, so I always bring up the informal sector. And we have to. Like, I think IDB is in the same boat, but we have environmental and social safeguards where we do look at how is the informal sector being impacted, or how are people living around, the waste sites being impacted. But I think I don't know if it's necessarily a skill as much as kind of understanding and having that ground experience.
Yeah,
Diana, do you want to add in? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
I agree. I don't know. I can't think like of a specific like skill that you would have to have, mostly for the informal sector. I would say experience just working with different stakeholders of the waste sector is very, very important, because you learn like that each stakeholder is going to have a very different view of the problem, and that feeds and helps a lot make a project or an activity or a proposal for project much more robust if you incorporate all the views of different stakeholders. And in the case of working with like the informal sector, as Silpa was saying, sometimes it's hard to if they are used to working individually, to make them like organize themselves, because of course they feel they have they don't have a schedule that they have to follow. They can go to work whenever they want. They don't have a boss. They feel like they are independent workers. But bringing them to an organization and brings them also a lot of benefits, just efficiencies that on the waste management. The prices of their materials can go up if the quality is better, and if you work as an organization that can be achieved more easily. But then if I, as a like professional from the IDB, go to the ground and talk to an informal worker without the background of having known an informal collector, an informal waste picker before, that's going to be a barrier to communicate with them, and for them to rely on your knowledge about it. So many times we had a lot of contacts, or I had contacts from my national government experience with informal workers in Colombia that had gone through all those steps. They started as a waste picker in a dump site, and they had worked through to organize themselves to start getting trained and be knowledgeable about the policies, and they were at a level that they now are able to talk head to head with national government officials and negotiate policies to support their work. So these are people that had gone through all those steps, and we were able to bring them to countries where this was not the case, and where the informal pickers, waste pickers, were still working individually. So when you, for example, when you bring someone with that life story, that can show them, look, I was working just like you, and I really recommend that you can do this to better your livelihood. That makes a big impact. So having worked with different stakeholders and identify the ones that can help you bring your message in a more clear way and in a more impactful way, I think that helps a lot. So always try to interact with stakeholders from all sectors, private sector, informal sector, NGOs, academia. I think that's very useful for having to work afterwards in different countries and in different contexts that are not familiar to you, but that can bring trust to your work when you are able to interact with different stakeholders.
And I think another question that might be a bit similar. So when one is involved in a project, are there some specific areas that you would recommend to focus on? For instance, Diana, you mentioned looking at the barriers, and then Silpa mentioned looking at the gaps, and also always bringing an informal sector in the conversation. So is there any specific areas that you would recommend that one should always be looking into, just to bring an add-on value to your profile, maybe, perhaps?
I would say for the waste sector, it's important for you to know about the communications part of projects. It's important to have a strong communication area in every project, just to let the residents know what your project is about, to let the informal sector know what your objectives are and how they can be included. Just to communicate with the stakeholders in an efficient way, to know what kind of media will, depending on your target audience, how you should be speaking, what kind of language should you be using. I think communications is a thing that's very important in projects and that can be applied over a whole range, very different range of projects and initiatives and activities. So I think that's an area that is important to get experience on. I guess policy, I would say, is also important to have a knowledge of how incentives can be introduced and how the framework in which you are at in your local context can be used, or how to, as you said, identify like barriers within the policy framework. I think that's something that's also very useful to bring to a project, to any project.
Silpa, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the way sector is it's just so complex, right? And I don't think, like, I agree, like the communications piece is essential. So I mean, I definitely agree with what Diana just said. But I don't think there's any one area you can, that you can really look at, because if you only look at infrastructure, then what if laws aren't being enforced, or what if people don't pay their user fees, or people are being hurt along the way, like the informal sector. So I don't know if there's any one aspect. Maybe the skill is actually to be very holistic and be able to understand the trade-offs along the way, and be able to look at the sector beyond the technical aspects, and be able to look at it financially in terms of behavior change, social development, service provision, be able to zoom out. If I have to pick one thing that I've seen over and over that causes kind of systems to suffer is probably operational financing, because it's really, it's easier to get funding for infrastructure. But then on a day-to-day basis, if you don't have people paying for the service, whether it's the user in terms of a household, or whoever's coming to the landfill or business, or, but if you're not recovering enough revenue, then the system's going to fall apart very quickly, and then all of a sudden there's going to be dumping along the way, or collection won't be regular. And we see this across the board in most of the countries we work in, where it's hard to get people to pay for services. But I think it's foundational, and it would cause the system to collapse.
Perfect. I think that's all the question we had today, or maybe perhaps, yeah. So thank you both of you, Silpa and Diana, for your availability and such interesting insight on how we can make our careers more progressive. And thank you everybody for joining in.